funding, the allocation of funding for disaster relief for the earthquake, and the conflict between using that funding for immediate needs and funding for future infrastructure to protect themselves from earthquakes in the future. That must be going through your mind, the allocation of funding for the problem now and the problem into the future?
No, that's a very, very good question. And to give you an example, we have a program called Adopt a School program, www.adoptaschool, I think, .fj. If you go to that, please have a look at that, and maybe your organization can actually adopt a school. As I mentioned yesterday, we have something like 226 schools that were damaged. Now, for the first time in Fiji's history, we actually partnered with the private sector, in particular the engineering firms, through the Fiji, it's called the Fiji Institution of Engineers, where they, pro bono, went and assessed all the schools for us. And if you go to the website, you will see the list of all the schools that have been damaged. You will also see the engineer's report that's actually been downloaded on a PDF format. You will then have a column that talks about the immediate needs of that school. Then you have what you call the long-term needs. So the long-term needs is basically climate proofing in a very fundamental manner. The immediate needs is something basically we need to fix up the school to get it up and running. There are still kids, some schools where they do not still have proper classrooms. But in order to be able to fix that up, obviously the schools that are buildings that we're building right from ground will do it in a fundamental manner. There are some schools, for example, the walls may be all okay, the floor is fine, but the roof's gone. So in order to perhaps, really climate proof it, you may actually need to take down some of the walls. But that's very, very costly. So the options are there for us. So you can see, as a person who wants to adopt a school, what are the costs involved. So it is a balancing act. Where we can immediately climate proof it, we will do so. Where from a practical perspective we can probably get it up to category 3, 4, we'll get it done. At least the students will have a roof over their heads. So all the costs are there, and you also can go to the site. It will show you exactly where the school is located in Fiji. And I appeal to all of you, please. And I also appeal to CPA Fiji branch. As an organization, you can actually adopt a school. Yesterday I was with Fiji Airways celebrating the 65 years. They've decided to adopt 2 schools in Taveuni. As you know, Taveuni was also quite heavily hit, in particular the southern part of Taveuni. So they've decided to adopt 2 schools. Once you adopt a school, you'll then be given an update as the school is constructed. You'll then, of course, get to have your plaque. So CPA, Fiji branch, will get the plaque. You have an affinity with that particular school, affinity with a particular building, because many rural schools in Fiji, as they got money, the committee got money, they built one classroom. So they're individual classrooms. So in those instances, what we are trying to do is, rather than having individual buildings, we can actually put a double-story building with, 5 classrooms at the bottom, 5 classrooms up on the top. So you actually have only one roof to deal with. When you have 10 buildings, you actually have 10 roofs to deal with. So it becomes a lot more expensive. So these are the kind of, I suppose, smart techniques we are trying to use. But it's a very good initiative, and we've already got people now coming forward to take that up, and I think it'll be a good gesture on the part of your organization to do that. In some schools, the cost may be $5,000 only. Some of them is about $400,000. You may actually want to adopt only one building in a school. So these are the kind of options available, but most definitely that's the type of issues that we are looking at. There are a lot more fundamental issues. For example, as we've discussed, if you look at the northwest of Viti Levu, most of the power lines went down. I think the last lot of people who used to have electricity and just got electricity was only a few weeks ago. There's something like 9,000 kilometers of electrical cables that went down. That's a lot of electrical cables. So the issue there was not about, as the CEO of FEA is here, I will tell you, the issue was not necessarily about money. The issue is more about having the right amount of people and the right equipment all at the same time to be able to put it all up at the same time. I mean, they've done a fantastic job in terms of getting it all up. But the future then is, do we go underground? Because you could have a cyclone again, God forbid, next year, the year after that, and you keep on putting the poles, keep on going down. So what are we going to look at? I mean, it's costly affair. But if you're able to get it all up at once, notwithstanding the fact it's costly, next time when you have a cyclone, it won't go down because it can't go down because it's underneath. So these are the kind of options we need to weigh. But I would please urge you to have a look at the Adopt a School program. It's very important.
Just a quick question. We saw in the recent budget there was a continued commitment towards investment in infrastructure. Can you tell us what government thinks are the other growth areas in the economy for this fiscal year?
I think, the construction industry is also quite big in respect of, apart from the infrastructure, public utilities, roads, water, electricity. For example, water has received, or WAF has received unprecedented funding in approximately $305 million. But there are other areas that we think obviously is already booming, like construction. In fact, this morning, if you also have time, if you go up to where Duvu village is, I took a walk up there. There used to be a provincial school, and that's now been turned into a technical college. It's called Nanraga Nawasa Provincial Technical College. And we've got now 13 of these. The Honourable Prime Minister is up in Vanuatu, who's opened 2, one in Bua, one in Madhwata. And yesterday was Madhwata. Now, I was talking to the principal there, and he was saying that students who have only done half of their course, part of the course requirement is that they go and get a work placement. They are not coming back because their employers are just grabbing them. There's a shortage of skill sets in Fiji. So people who've done sort of half of their joinery, carpentry, plumbing degree, or even pastry making, whatever, they're simply sucked up by the workforce. So I think, obviously in those areas, construction industry is quite huge. The areas that we also are quite keen on developing is the ITC sector. You would have seen recently a group of Australian parties, interested parties were here by our High Commissioner in Canberra, High Commissioner Yogesh Punja. He brought them over. We have our trade commissioners going in, and recently they also had some discussions with some other people. I think the ITC sector is quite interesting. We have the capacity. This is why we're very keen to work with our telecom providers to ensure we have the right speed, we have the width is quite good. We have an exciting opportunity. Of course, the Samoans have decided to have a submarine cable link to the Southern Cross cable, which lands in Vatuanga. So we are quite lucky in the sense that we have got the Southern Cross cable actually landing in Fiji, which links, west coast of North America to Australia. So all the other Pacific Island countries, in order for them to link up, they come to Fiji. So the Samoans are actually linking up to Fiji, but the cable is actually coming between Taveuni and Savusavu, so Vanuatu and Taveuni. So we've decided as a strategic move to build a pipe out of that cable that's going to come through. It's costing us, I think, approximately about $5 million US, and World Bank is actually funding that. So we'll have Vanuatu connected. So there's obvious opportunities there. I think of course, medical is one very interesting area. I'm sure you had discussion with Dr. Harry yesterday. We are having some also discussions on the sidelines with respective parties, including his organization, and we hope to have some traction on that, and very, very quickly. And there is, of course, an urgency to address many of the issues in the medical sector. The services sector generally overall, and to be able to take advantage of the fact that we are geographically very much in the hub. The financial services, we had just 2 days ago, we had a meeting with the head of UNCITRAL, which is a UN organization that looks after electronic transactions. We are looking at things like insolvency laws, sale of goods law that is internationally available and that is recognized internationally. So that will actually reduce the cost of doing business with players in Fiji and of course cost of business for us to be able to do business with other people. These are the kind of fine-tuning that we are doing behind the scenes, and you'll see again a plethora of targeted laws to be able to improve those areas. But ICT services overall, of course construction is growing. We believe there's a lot of opportunity for financial services. We can see the recent announcement by ATH in respect of telecommunications overall. I think there's an opportunity for Fiji, and again, Fiji to become in the hub status. Agriculture is still one of those areas that is very much underexploited. The reality that now you can get agricultural leases for 99 years, I think is quite profound. We have vast tracts of land in Fiji, or lands that were actually used for agricultural purposes, but done in a very rudimentary type of manner, because you had agricultural leases both under Crown land, Itaukea land, and also freehold land when they gave it out on lease, was only restricted to 30 years. Now, mainstream banks don't play in the agricultural sector, generally speaking, in Fiji, primarily because the land could not be used as collateral. I mean, banks are reluctant to lend, using land as security when the lease term is only for 30 years. But they very readily lend or use as collateral land for leases for tourism purposes, which is 99 years. So now agricultural leases, because of the changes in the law, can be leased up to 99 years, which makes it a lot more attractive. And we hope that we'll get a lot more commercial enterprise in the agricultural field, and that I think is still another area. But generally over speaking, I think there are a lot of opportunities in terms of value adding. Some of the things that we are doing in a very rudimentary manner, there's a lot of opportunities to do value adding too.
Craig Eller from the University of Auckland. Later on I'm talking about international tax, and I hope this is not a really unfair question for you, but I'm just curious as to whether you think whether Fiji has a base erosion and profit shifting problem as far as its multinationals are concerned.
So what was the first part?
It's just whether you think Fiji has a base erosion and profit shifting problem.
Base erosion?
Yeah, so it's really, it's when the multinationals have carried on their activities, but they're paying an effective rate of tax which is lower than the standard corporate tax that other domestic companies are paying. And so you've got this potential competitive inequality. Just perhaps I should say, and maybe this is helpful, that I think in New Zealand the private sector and certainly the advisors believe that's not really such a case, but the revenue authorities take the view that it is a significant problem, and I suspect that that's maybe the position in Australia as well too. But I'm just curious to know how you instinctively feel the corporates are behaving, the big multinational corporates are behaving in Fiji.
No, thank you for the question. I mean, in terms from a policy perspective, and even the laws that we have, there's no distinction made between foreign companies and local companies. For example, in our tax-free zones, we have a tax-free zone now that extends from almost, a third out of Lautoka, going all the way up to the boundary of Nassori, which is northwest of Vitilevu. And the Vanuatu is entirely a tax-free region, so are the other outer islands. Now, it's not only applicable for foreign companies, it's also applicable for local companies too. And indeed, it's mainly local companies that have taken advantage of those tax-free zones. There's a couple of companies in Vanuatu, for example, there's a partnership between foreign nationals and, of course, locals. But there is no specific demarcation. There have been companies, for example, in the past, when we had, there's one particular company, without mentioning names, were involved in transfer pricing. That obviously is a critical issue, and I'm sure that's an issue that faces many countries also, where they set up shop here, but they sell their goods at a reduced price, of course, to a related company offshore. And then that related company is the one that makes the big buck. We've tried to address that. That particular company, of course, is now paying various other taxes. But that is something that we're quite mindful of. On the flip side also, we have local companies that set up shops in countries like your country, in New Zealand, in Australia, perhaps some other countries, where they buy goods at a very reasonable price or very cheap price, and it's bought into Australia, New Zealand, and then they have the enormous markup and sell it to a related company back into Fiji. What that does is that it shifts money out of the country in a big chunk, and secondly, they only charge a lower margin here, but in fact they are making a much bigger margin. And that has been one of the issues in respect of the price of goods in Fiji. And we've continuously said this, that unfortunately in Fiji, many businesses don't have the approach that they should work on a higher turnover, a lower margin but higher turnover, which is a much better way of going. Because it not only, for example, gives you a higher turnover at the end of the day, but it also adds to robustness within the economy. And a small economy like Fiji is vulnerable in many respects. So we need to be always very creative and always need to be on the cutting edge to ensure that we keep that robustness up. Let's not make, a kill on one sale, whether it's second-hand cars or whether it's selling bulla shirts. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I walked into a shop in Nandi. This is probably about 7 years ago. And there's a very nice bulla shirt up on the wall, and I said to the owner, it was marked $65. And I said to the owner, I said, how much? He said, for you, $20. Now, he probably sold it to me for $20 because I was a minister. But then, that's what I thought to myself. Another guy walked in, and local, and said, how much? He said, $25. So I said to him, I said, why do you have 65? He said, that's the tourist price. So I said, look, you obviously are making money by selling it to the local guy for $25. You're probably making money with me too. You're not selling to me at cost. But maybe the margin is lower. So in other words, you can actually survive by selling it at $25. If you sold it at the same price to the tourist at $25, he or she probably buy 5 pieces. Do they suddenly say, oh, $25 Fijian, not bad. I'll buy one for my uncle, my grandfather, my nephew, whatever it is. And that's how it should work. And I'm glad to say that if you walk down Nandi town now, even Port Denarau, which many tourists go to, you'll actually find those fake polo T-shirts at $19, and they don't actually have a distinction. You'll find the bulla shirts not having that distinctive pricing. So I think that is a model that we like to follow, whether it's in hardware, whether it's in banking services, whether it's in ATM fees, whether it is in selling any other goods and services in Fiji. So, and of course, one can argue and say that, well, the economies of scale don't necessarily exist, but there is a fine balance, and we believe there's a room for opportunity, or there's an opportunity to actually fix that up. But in Fiji's case, I think we do have money going offshore because of people setting up. I mean, I've had people, for example, who manufacture, do slight manufacturing in motor vehicles over here in Fiji. They do revamping or remodeling of it. So, our wiper may cost from China $500, but they buy it through the company based in Australia, and they sell it to Fiji for $3,000. These are the kind of exorbitant pricing that actually does take place, and that's something they need to be aware of.
Let me just take you back to the opening statement regarding VAT. I have a question on that. Now, prior to this budget that we've just received, some goods and services were VAT exempt. Under the new budget, the VAT exemption on some of these goods and services have been uplifted, and residential rent is one of them. So now residential rent is VATable, provided, it is my understanding, that the landlord needs to be registered for VAT, and the landlord's aggregate income needs to be over 100,000.
From the rent.
That's right. So my question is, we all know there's a residential rent freeze order, but we also have the new budget, which tells the landlord that they need to impose a 9% VAT on whatever rent that the tenant is currently paying. Could you please give us further guidance on this? Because now we have two conflicting orders, and how does the landlord manage that?
Well, I do not necessarily see that as a conflict, but I think there is opportunity for the recognition by the Commerce Commission that there needs to be different approaches to different ranges in the rental market, residential rental market. So I hope that answers your question, and I don't want to obviously preempt what the Commerce Commission is going to say or do.
Honourable Minister, if you could perhaps enlighten the audience on the MIGA, Multilateral Investment and Guarantee Agency. I understand you went to Washington, and I've found in my dealings a lot of the international investors are not aware of the benefits they can obtain using those MIGA guarantees, investing into Fiji. I understand New Zealand is not a part of that, but Australia definitely is. So that is something that could assist investment inflows into Fiji.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, thank you for that question. MIGA is actually a subsidiary of the World Bank, which is the insurance arm of the World Bank. They do risk assessment of countries, and essentially what they do is that they guarantee or give a form of insurance to foreign investors that if they were to go to country X, that their investment, their profits would be protected. And Fiji now is one of the beneficiaries of MIGA's extension of their services to Fiji. So we have actually passed that on to Investment Fiji. I assume that they have put it on their website. It's available for foreign investors who do come into Fiji, that MIGA's facilities are available to them. It's no cost to us per se, but it's a form of guarantee to those investors if they do come to Fiji. And we are actually quite delighted about the fact that we do have this provision now, and we are able to go to international fora and to be able to say, look, this is available to you. So your supposed risk perception in Fiji is further reduced by having this facility, because he is an international organization that believes that Fiji is, a safe bet, and they in fact are willing to also insure that investment.
For everyone's information, I spoke to Standard & Poor's in Hong Kong about this, and they say that you can actually, the country sovereign rating can go up 1. So whatever, if you use a MIGA guarantee, which is quite beneficial if you work in the international market.
Yep.
Foreign Investment Act, where it says that if you've got a private company which is owned by foreigners, then you have to get an approval from the CEO of Investment Fiji before you can actually transfer shares. So, normally the Articles of Association would determine in a private company the preemptive rights or how the shares would be transferred, but we now have to sort of get a pre-approval that the CEO of Investment Fiji has to approve these proposed share transfers.
Yeah, I think the issue has been in that area, there has been a laxity of the ability of Investment Fiji to monitor foreign investment certificates. We've had previously, for example, foreign investors who have come into the country with a particular objective to say, for example, invest in a particular sector, but then they've gone up with the help of professionals in Fiji, gone off and invested in other areas which they weren't supposed to. But then the CEO of Investment Fiji had basically no teeth to do anything about it. In fact, they ventured into areas that was only the domain of locals, although, as you know, that we've relaxed the rules regarding that. So that was one issue. The other one, of course, is that it is to stop, it's in terms of compliance with our international obligations. What if they were to transfer shares to some terrorist? What if they transferred shares to somebody who's a high-risk person from overseas? So this is the ability to have those checks to ensure that we actually able to fulfill our compliance internationally and regular and adhere to those rules, but also to ensure that we have credible investors coming into Fiji. Because there's obviously, if we take that approach what you're proposing, I don't think it's another bureaucratic hurdle. I think there's generally a propensity in Fiji to any sort of regulation to sort of say, oh, it's another, bureaucratic, hurdle. No, it's not. I mean, I find, in fact, to be frank with you, I find some professionals in Fiji become the lackeys of their clients. They need to actually have a fundamental belief in ensuring that the laws of the country are adhered to. It's very critical. You go to Singapore, you have a very liberal economy. You talk to any professional, they will always make sure that their client actually adheres to the laws of the country. I'm not saying we have perfect laws in Fiji, but there is a move to modernize the laws. There's a move to ensure that we have good processes in place. And it is very critical that we have the assistance of the professionals in this room, professionals outside this room to ensure, that we have good transparent rules and people know exactly what is happening, and we also are able to quarantine ourselves from people who will, in fact, decrease our value as an investment destination.
Morning, Honourable Minister. I guess just to lead on from Renu's question, the concern is the duplication of requirements, because we already need to get Reserve Bank approval for the change in shareholding, and then we're going to investment Fiji as well. So the concern is just increasing the cost of doing business by duplicating the requirements. The second question, Minister, is with all these changes in recent laws with the Companies Act, income tax, etc., there's really a lot for business to go through. In relation to the tax changes, since you asked for questions on tax, thought I might send you one. If you bought a home 15 years ago and you then invested with knowing that there'd be no tax when you sold it on the gain, a few years back we introduced capital gains tax, so that went to 10%, so a reasonable amount of tax on the gain. Then you get posted to New Zealand, for example, for 2 years, so you rent your house out for 2 years. But then you decide you'll stay in New Zealand, so you sell the house. If you now sell the house, the effective tax rate, if you've got a larger profit, goes up to over 40% because of SRT and income tax, which potentially is a disincentive for investment. I'm just wondering if there'll be some reconsideration of the implications in terms of that law.
Jerome, the issue here is this. I mean, I love the way that you guys put this. You say that, when they bought a house, they did not know there was capital gains tax. When you started certain businesses, tax rate was 33%, now it's 20%. So should you go back to paying 33% tax rate for corporate tax? My point is this. All countries in the world do make policy changes. All countries in the world increase or decrease tax. And that is essentially what has happened in Fiji. But the issue regarding specifically of that, I don't have the provisions in front of me. The idea, of course, the capital gains tax, as you know, capital gains tax is not something that's unique to Fiji. Many other countries have it. We thought that 10% is a very reasonable amount. Some countries have 15. I don't know how much it is in Australia. Do you still have it? What's the rate? 25%, and it's very complicated. Oh, very or complicated? 25% and complicated in Australia. It's 10% in Fiji, and I don't think it's very complicated. Yeah. My point is this. I mean, I don't know the specifics, and I don't want to give you tax advice now. But we can have a discussion with it on the sidelines. But my point is this, is that we have, as you know, since we put in CGT, we have actually reviewed it. We have made amendments to it. So as you know that we have, for example, now exempted transfer of shares within families from, I think, parents to children, even to in-laws to daughter-in-law. I think those things have happened. We've also now exempted your first residential property too, so in that case, my understanding is, and I stand to be corrected by the CEO of FERCA, is that, using that example, if I have bought a house, it's my own house, a residential house, and I'm living in it, and then I migrate to New Zealand or I get a posting in New Zealand, and I decide to sell this residential place of mine, I will actually be exempt from paying CGT, correct? The first home, my residential home.
The concern is the retrospective tax. So I think government should have its fair share of tax, but it's the retrospective imposition of tax which is the concern. And on your residential home, if you've actually rented it, it becomes a depreciable asset, which is then subject to income tax rather than capital gains tax. And that's the concern.
Okay.
And it's a retrospective imposition on a gain that's already there before the introduction of the tax.
I think but you know, we also have the methodology has been worked that if you cannot produce the receipts to show, for example, renovations, you can then go to the Solicitor General, who then acts as the independent arbitrator to be able to come to some form of, you know, agreed pricing. And I think that's worked out quite well. I don't think there's been that many representations to the Solicitor General's office. I think, you know, I just want to come back on the other point, you know, Jerome, about, yes, we have to get RBF approval, but the CEO of Investment Fiji should do that in any case. So I think rather than you having to do it, if the law is now saying that the CEO of Investment Fiji you know, has to give the approval, he himself will have to do those checks. So don't go off and do it yourself. Get him to do all the work. You don't bear the cost, let him bear the cost. Because that's the way. So I think, you know, let's not jump the gun. Let's be a bit more positive about it. What I'm saying is that we're trying to put in place these processes. If your client is coming along and you may want to change the shareholder, then you say to CEO of Investment Fiji, this is the person's name, please give us the clearance. Now he has to go and get that. And we've actually now had discussions with Investment Fiji. They need to take more of a responsibility because, you know, we are mindful of things like cost of doing business, etc. But on the flip side, you know, I think we need to also talk about how the cost of business in other sectors have also come down, you know, whether it's telecommunication costs in other areas. And of course, you know, corporate tax rates.